He left everything to the maid, the lawyer said, and my teacup didn't shatter, because my hands knew better than my heart how to hold on. I watched the steam curl up from Earl Grey that had gone cold, watched it braid with dust motes floating in the lamplight like tiny tired ghosts. Lila was standing near the fireplace, quiet as wax, eyes fixed on the hearth as if there was a message hiding in the soot. She wore that simple navy dress I'd bought her at the church rummage sale, the one with the mother-of-pearl buttons that always made her look a little like Sunday morning, even on a Tuesday. Her hands were folded, but I'd known those hands long before I met her. Lord have mercy. Sometimes you know somebody's hands like you know your own. My neighbors stared, hungry for the ruin, and I thought, well, let them. This old English-style house on the hill had seen worse hungers. Hawthorne House, stone bones, black and white timber, leaded glass like iced paper, had stood through wars, weddings, and that one winter, when half the foxes froze in the hedgerow. It could outlast a scandal, whispered over dry cookies and church. Coffee, Mrs. Whittaker, the lawyer said gently, and it sounded like someone calling a widow back up from the bottom of the well. I nodded. I didn't ask him to repeat it. The words had already threaded themselves into the cracks of the panelled room, and I knew they'd rattle around here long after my voice was a memory. My dear, before I go any further, if this story has touched your heart even a little, do subscribe and stay with me through the end. I'll try not to waste your time, honey. I know what time costs. Charles built his life like he stacked his books. Tidy, tall, a little too proud, and I built mine like I stitched quilts. Patch by patch, heart by heart, some pieces I kept hidden on the underside, 'cause they were too bright to bear. We moved into Hawthorne House the summer the creek went dry, and the corn leaned like old men do when they're listening. The house had beams stained so dark, the wood looked like it had remembered a fire. Every corner had a draught that smelled like lavender and the first snow. English style in the American countryside, a gentleman's fantasy dropped in the middle of real life, my life. The first night we slept here, a storm combed the hill with wet fingers, and the slate roof sang. I remember lying awake, counting the breaths between thunder, a girl again for just an hour, and Charles whispered, "You hear it, she's breathing." He meant the house. He always thought in stories. He'd lit a candle and set it on the window seat, and its flame made the panes look like old honey. In the morning, I found the first secret. There's always a first. The third stair up to the landing squeaked. Unless you stepped on the very edge, just a note, nothing more. But behind the wainscot under the eaves, where the cedar closet meets the nursery door, the panel slid back if you pressed your palm right in the middle, just so. Behind it was a narrow crawl, dust and old laughter, and a small wooden box with a brass crab on top. Inside, a child's silver rattle, a lock of hair tied with faded blue ribbon, and a dried violet pressed between 2 pages of a Bible. That violet near broke me. It looked exactly like my memory of a girl I used to be. I did not tell Charles about the hidden box. We were young married, and I already knew that love is soft, but life is not, and you tuck away what you can. We hired help after Charles took on the Lions account and stopped coming home before midnight. Lila came recommended by the church in town. Quiet, capable, trustworthy. The pastor's wife wrote in looping ink, as if she'd embroidered the words herself. When Lila walked up the hill with a small suitcase and a bigger backbone, I recognized her from a dream I'd had at 19, or maybe from a song my mother hummed shelling peas in August. A place in me sat up like a dog hearing its name. "Mrs. Whittaker," she said, eyes flicking to my hands. My ring. The oval cameo I wore like armor. Thank you for having me." Her voice had that clean country water in it. And when she stepped into this house, the draft stopped shivering for a beat, as if Hawthorne House recognized her too. Lila knew how to be quiet in the rooms that asked for quiet, and how to be swift. Where slowness would have been a curse, she could keep a fire steady. All night, she never left a kettle to scream. She had a way of putting fresh flowers near my seat at the table, on days my bones ached. Didn't say a word about it, just did it, like heaven slipping in, disguised as common kindness. Sometimes she hummed while she worked. Not a hymn exactly, more like the memory of one. I heard it once in the pantry and had to put my hand out to steady myself. My mother used to hum that very tune. How could that be? People say melodies travel like moths through holes we can't see. Maybe that's true. I suppose that's how the slow unraveling began. Little threads pulled by a song, a look, a key, left in the wrong lock. You ain't got to fall off a cliff to break a bone, sweetheart. A step will do it. We were 3 in that house. Me, Charles, and Lila. And we were 4 if you counted the house, which I always do. Meals were taken beneath the mullioned windows, where afternoon light sat like a cat. And nights I would sit by the old piano, fingers on the polished wood, not playing, just listening to it hold its breath. We don't get to escape ourselves just because we change our address. Honey, I tried. For decades I tried. When I was 17, I fell in love with a boy who tasted like sweet tea and poor decisions. James Avery had a smile that made the preachers nervous. We had our own summer inn, a lean-to by the river, and we had consequences too. Told nobody. My daddy was a deacon who believed in God and the belt. It was my mother who took me to a woman with a clean apron and sad eyes. There was a baby. There was a night I can't talk about without my throat closing up. There was a month of bleeding like a second baptism. And then there was me, walking out of that little town with a suitcase, and my mouth full of rocks. Vows I made to cement that hurt behind walls. Even God would have to knock on. I did not tell Charles. He had met the part of me that had survived, and he loved it well enough. Years later, here at Hawthorne House, I kept the pantry stocked with sugar and secrets. Lila learned the squeak of the third stair, and how to make Charles's eggs the way he liked them. 3 minutes, soft, salt first, pepper after. She never asked for much. Just one Sunday afternoon a month to walk into town and stand at the bus stop, like she was waiting for someone who never came. I watched her once from the upstairs window, how she leaned into the light like it could answer her. And goodness gracious, I had to swallow a wild feeling that rose up and tried to name itself. People always think the first betrayal is a knife. It's often a door closing without a sound. The night I heard those murmurs in the back garden, I wasn't looking for anything. I was on my way to the scullery to put out the lamps. Charles had taken to walking after supper, hands clasped behind his back. The kind of walk men do when they have something to hide and want to act like they're looking at stars. I heard his voice first, and then Lila's. Soft, low, one thread, braided with another. I stepped into the shadow of the ivy-laced arch. The thorns snagged my shawl and wouldn't let go. I can't, she whispered. You must, he said. There was a pause that held every breath I had left, and then he said a name. Eleanor, not Lila. Eleanor, my mother's name. Not a name anybody living had a right to be using in that garden. I stood there until the damp had crept up my ankles and into my knees, until the lamps blew out and the sky remembered how to be night. Then I went upstairs the long way, because when your heart gets cracked, you avoid the stairs that squeak. I drifted through the lingerie drawers, as if lace could save me. Sleep was a stranger for a week. My dear, before I continue, would you do something for me? If you're still by the fire with me, If your own memories are rustling in their boxes, do subscribe and stay with me through the end. I'll hold your hand. You hold mine. Deal. It would be convenient to say I confronted them the next day, but truth is slow and pride is stubborn. Instead, I watched. That's what women my age are best at. Quiet watching. I watched how Charles's cough got meaner, how his hands trembled when he poured coffee, how he'd stand at the bottom of the stairs and pause like a man considering a mountain. I watched how Lila wrapped a scarf around her hair and went to the attic in the afternoons when the laundry was done, as though dust held a secret language she could read. I followed her once. The attic of Hawthorne House is not a place for the impatient. Its beams and old trunks and a view of the orchard you can't get anywhere else. The light up there is always bent, like it's been traveling too long to stand straight. Lila was by the Pharaoh trunk, the one tied with a strip of faded sailing rope, kneeling with her head bowed. Not in prayer, exactly. More like listening. When she left, I waited for the old stairs to settle and went over to the trunk. The rope gave, like it had expected my hands. Inside were sheaves of letters, tied with blue ribbon, and a small tin box that smelled faintly of lemon oil. I opened the tin, and there, Lord, have mercy, were my own teenage letters. Not to Charles, not to anybody who had a right to them. Pages of crooked script, written by a girl who thought metaphors could save her. How'd they got here? My name on the top. Ruth Eleanor Graham in that girlish hand you can't redo once your sorrow has taught you to write smaller. And inside one folded page near the bottom, a pressed violet, exactly like the one in the cedar box behind the nursery panel. It's possible to feel the bottom drop out from under your heart and keep standing. I'm living proof. When I turned around, Leela was standing in the door of the attic, like a repentance you didn't plan for. She didn't look at the letters. She looked at me, straight as a plumb line. You shouldn't be working in the dust with your lungs, she said, a little smile playing at the corner of her mouth, like she knew how to be kind even when she ought to be angry. Those letters, I said. Where'd you find them? In the wall behind the nursery, she said. A long time ago, before you knew me. Before. How? She tilted her head, like a bird, like a daughter. You always did write like a river, even when you were a girl. Who told you that? You did, she said. And then she left me standing in the attic with a past that had crawled out of its grave and put its cold hand in mine. I found the first red envelope, the day Mr. Darnell from Lyon and Pierce came, with a leather briefcase and the kind of smile people use when they're about to break something politely. It was slid under my bedroom door like a whisper. On the front, just my name, Ruth, and my husband's handwriting that always looked a little drunk on ink. Inside, 3 sentences. My Ruth, by the time you read this, I will have made mistakes I'm not brave enough to say out loud. Forgive me if you can't forgive me yet. Check the piano bench. I went straight to the old Steinway, hands shaking like leaves when the train comes through. The bench opened with a sigh, like a tired woman. Inside, under the sheet music and a small tin of Roseanne somebody had abandoned a century ago, was a wooden box with a key taped to the lid. The key was old and smooth like a wedding band. The box contained a letter dated 2 months prior, a deed with Lila's name where mine ought to have been, and a photograph I'd never seen. Charles, younger, standing on the front steps of Hawthorne House with a woman who looked a little like me if I'd been born in a different house. She held a baby whose face was hidden by my own hand, younger and foolish, reaching toward the camera as if I could snatch back time. I could smell the hurt coming like rain. I won't read you every word of Charles's letter. Some letters are meant to die in the hands they love. But this much I will say. There are ways of leaving a woman that are softer than slamming the door, and my husband tried the soft way. He was very sick, and he had very little time, and he had found something out he should have asked me about 20 years sooner. That I once had a child. He wrote that he'd met Lila by accident. If you believe in accidents, in town at the hardware store when she returned the wrong nails, with a laugh that made him look at his own sins. She was looking for work, and he was looking for penance. I hired her, he wrote, because she knew you and didn't know she knew you. I hired her because she moves like somebody hiding something precious. I hired her because I could not bear the thought of leaving you alone and unforgiven. He wrote that his business was in trouble, and the Lions account was going to break us with lawsuits we had no right to be holding in the first place. He wrote that if anything stayed in my name, the vultures would swoop and take and call it justice. While the town called it tragedy, he wrote that Lila had nothing for them to take, and everything I had ever lost. Then, a sentence I read so many times, the ink wore thin under my tears. Lila is yours, Ruth. I made a sound then my body didn't. No, it could make a sound you couldn't rehearse if you tried. I held the photograph like it could give me back hands I barely remembered. I ran my fingers over the curve of a baby's ear, like you might brush a cobweb aside. Lila is yours. If this were a neat story, I would tell you I ran downstairs and fell into her arms and said, "Daughter," and we unraveled that knot in one gentle pull. But softness ain't always the truth. I put the letter back in the box, and the box back in the bench, and I poured myself a drink I had no intention of savoring. I waited. I watched. I tried to see her with new eyes, and failed because my old eyes were so full of my old failures. When the will was read and the town breathed out a single, scandalized breath, everything to the maid, I thought my heart would lay down and be still. It didn't. It kept on. That's the worst part of living through a thing that ought to kill you. How life keeps stubbornly happening. Mrs. Whitaker, Mr. Darnell said again, like he might balance my grief on his ledger. The terms are clear. There were looks. People always look at a woman like that. Half pity, half appetite. I set my teacup down and folded my hands in my lap where nobody could see them tremble. Then the terms are the terms, I said, and it sounded like my mother when she'd made up her mind that a storm was just weather, not the end of the world. Lila never flinched. She didn't move toward me. She didn't move away. She was a mountain in a dress. When folks spilled out into the hall and the foyer and out into the gravel where the cars waited like anxious husbands, I stayed put and listened to the house settle into a new shape. When we were alone, I said, "You knew, because I'm not subtle when I'm tired." She nodded. I knew he changed his will. I didn't know he'd do it like that. Like what? As if we ain't got to live in this town. I laughed then. A brittle thing. We have to live in this house first. So we do, she said, and began to gather the cups, like somebody who'd been raised right. I reached for her wrist without thinking, a reflex older than my pride. Her skin was warm and familiar under the thin gold bracelet she wore, with a little charm shaped like a violin. I'd had a violin charm once, tied to a ribbon in 10th grade, given to me by a boy with dirty fingernails and a voice that turned August into a promise. I closed my eyes. "Who gave you that?" I asked her. "Lady from my first house," she said. "A nurse I called Auntie Clara. She said it was my mamma's." My throat was a tight door. "Do you know your mamma's name?" She looked at me, like a person looks at a horizon they've walked toward for so long, they forgot what it was for. I know what they told me, but I always thought, sometimes people don't tell you the truth they owe you, 'cause they think they're protecting you, when really they're protecting themselves. It was not a question, but it asked everything. I was not ready. God forgive me, but I needed to be asked twice before I answered. So I let go of her wrist and let all the finest parts of me go quiet. I'm tired, I said. This town is mean when it's bored. We'll talk in the morning. She nodded, because she knew how to respect a boundary that was really a fear wearing a good dress. That night, the house swelled with the kind of silence that knows how to hum. I took the letter from the bench to the bedroom and put it under my pillow, like a woman who has never learned the right way to hold a prayer. I lay there with my eyes open, listening to the rain begin again, soft as absolution. Just after midnight, a floorboard spoke, a whisper at my door, the slightest pause, someone asking permission without words. Come in, honey, I said, because sometimes your mouth knows before your mind. The door opened, and a sliver of hallway light cut a ribbon across the rug. Lila came in carrying the little wooden box I'd found behind the nursery panel. She set it on my nightstand as if she were delivering me to myself. I think you should open it now, she said. I already did, I answered, because I wasn't ready to be moved so kindly. Not all the way, she said gently. There's a false bottom. This house taught me, like it teaches everybody who lives here and pays attention. I sat up, bone by bone, and pulled the box toward me. Under the rattle in the ribbon and the violet was a fine seam you wouldn't notice if you'd never had to learn to notice fine seams. I slid my nail under and lifted. The panel gave with a soft sigh. There, folded into 4 and kissed by cedar, was a certificate stamped with the county seal I'd left without saying goodbye to. Birth certificate, it read, and the name was not a name I'd chosen. Rosalie May. The mother, Ruth E. Graham. The father, unknown. Maybe I should have stopped breathing then to give the dead their due. I didn't. I turned the certificate over, with hands that weren't sure what century they belonged to. On the back in blue ink was a note in a hand I recognized from casseroles and field trip permission slips. My mother's, for when the house is ready to forgive you, Ruthie. She is safe. She is music. She found us once. She'll find us again. Mama, I pressed the paper to my chest. I closed my eyes. My life walked up the stairs and stood at the edge of the bed and waited for me to stop being a fool. Lila, I said. Rosalie. She took a small step forward and her mouth trembled, just the corner, like a child trying not to cry on the first day of school. Mama, she said, and it cracked me open like a ripe peach falling clean in half. I reached for her. She climbed onto the bed like she had years of right to do so, and we held on to each other like a storm was coming. Maybe it was, but for the moment, there was just breath and salt and the sound of the house, patient and pleased. Forgiveness doesn't arrive as a parade. It comes like a shy neighbor with a pot of soup, and you have to invite it in and share one spoon from a chair that creaks. We talked the way women talk when there's nothing left to pretend. She told me about her first memories, a yellow kitchen, a lady with kind hands, a lullaby that felt borrowed. She told me about foster homes and learning to make beds with hospital corners, even if nobody asked her to. About finding a letter with my name in it in a church donation box when she was 22. A page that had slipped from a book of Psalms with ink missing where tears had kissed it. She told me how she held that torn page against her cheek and thought, I have a direction now. I told her about James Avery and the river and how I built my shame into a wall so high I called it weather. I told her about the day I met Charles, how he laughed at the way I said pecan and asked me to marry him after 2 weeks because he thought speed could outrun our pass. We were wrong about that, but we tried. We sat up till the rain quit telling the roof its secrets. And then, as if the house desired a clean slate, Dawn crept in, polite, through the lace, and for the first time since I learned how to keep still, I let my bones unclench. By breakfast, the world was another place. The town would make it ugly, when it could, but we had to eat. Lila, my Rosalie, fried eggs, and didn't let the butter brown. We took our coffee black and sweet, like sins we weren't ready to confess to anyone but each other. The ugly came quick. The paper in town ran a mean little paragraph about scandal and servants. The lion's men came like stray dogs with legal pads. A cousin I hadn't seen since my wedding called to check on me, and then asked if I'd be selling the silver. Folks in church did that thing where they look at you as if sorrow is contagious, and they're real healthy. But honey, we had a plan the minute we learned how to say each other's names without crying. And we had that letter from Charles, with all its half-brave explanations, and a list of accounts and their passwords that a man writes only when he wants to be forgiven, before he's sure he's earned it. We went to Mr. Darnell together, me in my Sunday coat and Lila in the navy dress with the mother-of-pearl buttons. I carried my mother's note in my pocket and the house's history in the way I held my shoulders. Mr. Darnell, I said, will honour my husband's will. We'll honour it because he made it with a reason and a tremble, but we'll also honour the truth. This is my daughter. I said it calm, like it was always true, which it was, even if I'd been slow to participate. He took off his glasses and wiped them like that would make the words I'd said less strong. I see, he said, which was the first nice thing he'd ever said to me. We went through the accounts line by line, transferred what needed transferring, set aside what needed hiding from the lion's dogs. Lord have mercy, I never thought I'd be grateful for the way the rich keep their riches. But when the wolves are on your porch, you're grateful for a good bolt. I'm not a hero in this story, sweetheart. I'm just a woman who stayed alive long enough to be surprised by grace. I wish I could tell you I forgave Charles with a clean sweep and then forgave myself, and that we never had a hard day again. But if I'd told you that, you'd call me a liar and you'd be right. Some mornings I woke up and felt like I'd been left on the curb. Some afternoons, I walked out to the orchard and screamed into a towel so the foxes wouldn't think I was hurt. The town hurt me because it could. And yet, every evening, Rosalie sat on the back steps with me and drank sweet tea and made me laugh about something small. The rooster who crowed at 2 p.m., the preacher's wife's new hat, the way we both sneezed twice in a row like we'd practiced it. We sat together and went through the old letters, my letters, and I glimpsed that girl I had once been. We put her back gently into the past, where she belonged, thanked her for surviving what she couldn't name, and promised her we'd do better with what we knew now. That's all any of us can do, you bet. A week after the will and the whispers, a small package came in the post. No return address, just my name and Hawthorne House. Like the world knows my address and will until the earth takes the wood back. Inside was a locket I had lost at 17, the one with a violin charm, and a note in an ink I recognized from the attic tin. Found this in a box of old church rummage. Figured it was looking for you, Auntie Clara. I sat down on the kitchen floor and laughed a little and cried a good deal and let Rosalie kneel beside me the way a child does when her mama's hands are older than she remembers. We opened the locket together. Inside was a picture torn from a larger one. You could see my chin and the corner of a baby's blanket. Rosalie reached into her pocket and pulled out a torn photograph of her own. She'd been carrying it for years, its edges soft as apologizes. We put the two halves together on the kitchen floor between the sink and the stove, and it fit like a hymn. Tell me, have you ever forgiven someone who broke your heart? I'd love to hear your story too. Sometimes I think we survive by stacking our stories like firewood, keeping one another warm by confession. We planted violets that spring under the nursery window, because of course we did. The house had been saving those flowers for us. Rosalie keeps a small brass dish on the piano for pressed petals that fall when she dusts. The piano, by the way, plays again. She found the courage to lift the floorboard one afternoon and lay her hands on the keys and play the first song she remembered knowing. I recognized it. Of course I did. My mother had hummed it. I had hummed it to James. Under the willow, the house hummed along, and the roof didn't leak that day. The day I forgave Charles for real. It wasn't because of a letter or a legal victory. It was because I was cleaning out his desk and found a list in his pocket notebook titled Ruth,
for when it's harder than it needs to be.
Under the title, 10 small instructions. Breathe. Eat something. Sit with your back to the sun. Touch wood. Touch water. Touch your daughter's hair. Look through the stained glass at 4 p.m. It looks like forgiveness. Call it a day. Try tomorrow. Forgive me anyway. He was a sinner, and so am I. He was a man who tried in the end to leave me cared for, even if he had to bruise me in public to do it. He bet on our privacy. He did not know I was ready to bloom out loud. It took me a while to love him again. I love him now. I still step around the third stair because some habits feel like respect. Sometimes the house gives me back something I didn't know I lost. Last night, behind a loose board in the pantry, I found a baby spoon with the initials RM. I held it and thought about my girl's first mouthful of peaches. I didn't get to be there, but today I baked a pie too sweet on purpose. And Rosalie and I ate it with spoons, right out of the pan, like sinners who'd been welcomed home. If you see us in town, we look like two women who live in a big old house and know what a secret feels like against their ribs. We are not ashamed to hold hands. Crossing the street, we are not ashamed of our smiles. We are not ashamed of the lavender I tie to the banister, or the way the light looks in the foyer at noon. People have stopped pretending they know better than we do what we should have done when they start again, and they will, because humans love a good story where they get to be the judge. We'll make tea and tell the truth kindly and get back to weeding the violets. Life ain't made of verdicts. It's made of breakfasts. Every now and then, I hear a footfall in the attic and know it's not a mouse. Hawthorne House keeps secrets, but not the mean sort. She keeps the kind that wait until you're brave enough to hear them. And once you are, she tells you what you're made of. I'm made of grief and skillet cornbread and a girl who had to grow up too fast and a woman who knew when to say, enough, and a mother who found her child in her own kitchen. I'm made of love, bent into odd shapes and still recognizable. One evening, just last week, a storm tried to light us up the way storms do in July. The roof sang and the lilacs bowed as if to greet a king. The power flickered and the whole house seemed to take a breath and decide to be kind. Rosalie came out with 2 quilts and draped one over my shoulders and one over hers. We sat by the window and she leaned her head on my shoulder like someone who has come home the long way around. Mama, she said, how long do you think the worst parts last? Depends, I said, on your stubbornness, on your generosity, on the weather. We laughed because sometimes the truth is funny, even when it should not be. The storm passed. It always does, sweetheart. Sometimes it leaves you a little crooked. That's all right. The world has enough straight lines. If you stayed with me till the end, my dear, thank you. Tell me the time and country you're watching from in the comments. It warms my old heart, knowing where my stories travel. 3 nights after the town decided what my life was worth, someone knocked on the door at 12:03 a.m. 3 slow knocks, like a secret keeping count. Rosalie sat straight up beside me in the lamplight. both of us listening to Hawthorne House. Gather her skirts. Old buildings don't like to be surprised. You can feel it, the way a heartbeat changes right before a tear. Stay, I whispered, and slipped my feet into the slippers Charles used to laugh at. They make you look like a librarian, he'd say. Lord have mercy. I'd never loved librarians more than I did that minute. The hall was a long black river, and I floated down it, hand on the wainscot, feeling the grooves some long-ago carpenter carved when he was thinking about the woman he shouldn't be thinking about. That's my guess. Wood remembers everything but the truth, precisely. I opened the door to a wet hat and a mustache that worried its own lip, Sheriff Hardy. He's the kind of man who never stands up all the way straight, 'cause life taught him not to look too tall near trouble. Evening, Mrs. Whittaker, he said, tipping rain onto my doormat. Or rather, morning. He glanced past me into the foyer, where the grandfather clock pretends time behaves itself. Is Lila home? She is, I said, and my heart threw a plate against the wall of my chest. I won't come in, he said, which is how you know a man is thinking about coming in. He looked down at the paper in his hand. I've got an order to conduct an inventory for the Lion audit. Not a seizure, mind you, just a list. He tried to offer me a smile on layaway. Tomorrow at 10. You woke me up to tell me about 10? I could taste the metal in my mouth. You couldn't send a postcard. Thought you might prefer to be warned, he said. Town's bristling. Thought you might want to prepare. Such a small word for a cliff. He tipped his hat again and left me with the rain and the smell of old leaves. I bolted the door and stood there until I could feel the house exhale. When I turned, Rosalie was in the hall, like a shadow that learned how to hold a hand. What do we do? She asked, and I could hear the child in her, the one who once waited at a bus station for a mama who didn't know her own name yet. We make tea, I said, because tea is the only weapon I was taught. And we go to the attic. My dear, before I continue, if you're walking this hallway with me, if your own house is stirring, would you stay with me and subscribe? I'll pour enough tea for both of us. This is where the secrets turn their faces toward the light. We lit one lamp, the good one that never sputters, and we climbed the back staircase, like women who've decided to open a door no matter what's behind it. The attic breathed out dust and apples and old sugar, and I could feel my mother's eyes on the back of my neck, the way sunlight watches a girl through a screen door. We went to the faro trunk again, the one tied with rope, that has always looked like a wedding vow from a sailor who forgot the ocean forgives no one. The trunk, the tin, the letters. We'd already danced this dance, but something in me kept staring at the back wall, a strip of boards that looked too content with themselves. Hawthorne House has a tell when she's hiding something. Her corners. Go smug. Bring me the violin charm, I said suddenly. Rosalie frowned, then understood. She undid the little gold charm from her bracelet and set it in my palm. It was no bigger than a fingernail, simple, sweet, the sort of thing that should have spent its life above a girl's heart, not inside a question mark. There was a notch between the boards, small as a broken promise. I slid the tiny violin into it and twisted like I was turning back time. A soft click. The panel swung an inch and stopped like it had changed its mind. I pulled and the board gave, revealing a small iron safe, mortared half into the wall. Not the kind thieves could get at without a sermon. Set into the front was a brass plate, engraved with a single word, Eleanor. Rosalie's breath hitched. Mama? She whispered, like a prayer and a dare in one. We searched the usual places for a key, behind the moulding, under the loose sheet of music in the piano bench, in the bottom of Charles's winter boots. Nobody my size ought to have been rummaging in at 1 a.m. Nothing. The safe just sat there, listening to two women panic politely. And then I remembered the third stair. Not the squeak. What came before the squeak? My daddy was a carpenter, with hands that never stopped telling the truth. He once taught me, while my mother pretended not to listen, how a tread could hide a hollow without telling the riser. "You want to tuck something away, Ruthie?" he'd said, winking like shame wasn't about to evict me. "You make sure the ordinary is extra." I went to the stair and pressed down where the squeak would have been if we had not trained ourselves. Around it, a tinny rattle under the wood, and I had to sit down right there on the steps and laugh until I remembered I was supposed to be afraid. We pried up the tread with a butter knife. Elegant as sin, inside was a small leather pouch tied with blue ribbon frayed to kindness. I poured the contents into my hand. A single key on a string and a note folded twice. The key had the weight of something that knew its purpose. The note had my mother's hand. "If you have found this, you are ready. Forgive yourself first." EGI looked at that E and that G, and I could almost hear her say my name, like she'd never once had to learn how to say goodbye. The key turned in the safe, like it had been hungry a long time. Inside was a ledger bound in cracked black leather, 2 envelopes, one red, one cream, and a reel-to-reel tape labeled in Charles's precise drunk-on-ink hand. "Eleanor, goodness gracious," I breathed. He left us his voice. We brought the tape down to the parlor like we were making an altar. The old recorder was in the den, covered with a floral scarf from the year everyone wanted to be British. I threaded the tape with the same hands that had buttoned 1,000 buttons and snapped 1,000 beans. The machine hummed. And then there he was, my husband in the air again. "My Ruth," he said, and his voice filled the room the way summer fills a screen porch. "If your heart needs a pause, sweetheart, take it. I'll wait. And if you're still here with me, tell me in the comments. Have you ever heard a voice you thought you'd buried?" I don't know who you'll be when you hear this, Charles continued, and I could hear the cough he tried to hide. I hope you'll be mad. I hope you'll be alive enough to be mad. I hope you'll also listen. The Eleanor Trust, named for your mother, yes. She always put the good silver in front of me when I came to supper, like she knew I'd do something. Both wrong and right. The trust predates me, predates you. This house and the land under it are tied to the women of your line. A stipulation, original deed, from 1894. Codicils from 1918 and 1954. They're in the ledger. The house cannot be taken for debts incurred by men from outside the line. That's why I did what I did with the will. If everything in my name stayed in your name, lions would have eaten you bone by bone. If everything went to a woman who wasn't you, and she, well, you see, they compound at the door. Legally, this house belongs to Eleanor's line. To you? To Rosalie, if you'll let that name land. I pressed my hand to my mouth and sobbed into my palm, so quiet only God could hear me. Rosalie held the other hand and started crying in the shape of a smile. "There's more," he said, and his voice shifted, like a man who decided to tell the truth to the people who could hurt him most. "Lyons is not your enemy, not the way it looks. The man you're thinking of, the one with the cufflinks like pennies, he's a symptom. The disease is older. The first lion took a loan from your great-grandfather and tied this house into it as collateral. It was paid. It was burned. The records say otherwise, because a man made a choice to keep his hand in all the purses on this hill. I was in it. I was young, and my ambition made me care less about right and more about making the numbers make me feel tall. Later, I tried to fix it. I made enemies I never learned the names of. If anything happens to me before I make it right, go to the ledger. Page 214. There's an account labeled Sparrow. I wasn't clever. There you'll find the path out. And if you can stomach one more sin from me, know this. I met her, your daughter. She was buying nails the day after the doctor told me the truth about my lungs. She looked like you, the way dawn looks like yesterday's light. I wanted to talk to her and be a fool. I hired her instead. I asked her to help me fix a thing I broke without telling her why. Forgive me if I've made a stranger sit at your table with your blood in her veins. The tape whirred a little, and then he laughed in that way that made you agree with whatever. He just confessed. Ruth, if you can, forgive me. If you can't, keep the porch light on. I'll find a way to send Grace around the back. The tape clicked. The machine kept humming, as if the house was going to answer. I turned to Rosalie. It's yours, I said. It was always yours. She shook her head, tears climbing out of her eyes. Ours, she corrected, gentle but fierce. He made sure. We opened the ledger to 214. The pages smelled like old coin and lemon, oil, and the numbers made a kind of music. If you've ever loved a man who counted to make sense of things. Sparrow was a series of transfers that looked like a braid. Money out of lion hands. Into a trust under the Eleanor name. Then into accounts at a bank that sits politely between legality and kindness. There were checks signed by names I recognized. From gravestones. There were notes in the margin, small and apologetic. Ruth will need proof. Copy deed. Talk to Darnell. Tell him only what he can afford to know. The cream envelope held the original deed. The red one held a photograph so old, the faces were almost smudged out of existence. A woman with my great-grandmother's jaw, standing on the same front steps, holding a baby wrapped in a quilt with a violet stitched into each corner. On the back, in that careful, careful hand. For the daughter who will come back, we didn't sleep. We watched the window go from ink to milk and let the morning lay her hands on our faces. I brewed coffee strong, enough to stand up by itself. At 9:55, Sheriff Hardy's car crunched the gravel. Let me, Rosalie said. She smoothed the navy dress down over her knees and stood in the light like it was part of her body. I loved her with a new ferocity that scared me and saved me. We opened the door before he could knock. Come on in, Sheriff, I said. You look like a man who'll drink coffee if a woman tells him it'll keep his soul. That true. He tried to joke, but he held his hat against his chest, like the hat could protect him from what comes next. He brought an appraiser with wire-rimmed glasses and a tape measure he kept flicking. Nervous like a boy on his first date, they started with the silver, like folks always do, then the paintings, the piano, the rug in the parlor that curls up its toes in winter. I poured coffee and didn't let my hand shake. Rosalie followed, and where the men's eyes saw value, hers saw history. Every time the appraiser named a number, I named a story. That teapot poured at my wedding. That rug held my mother, while she counted the beat of my first steps. People who've never belonged to anything don't understand the price of being attached to earth. Mrs. Whitaker, Sheriff Hardy said finally, this is just procedure. So is breathin'. I said sweet as honey, but I let the syllables carry a blade. And no one writes it down. We let them measure the piano. We did not show them the tape. We did not show them the ledger. We did show them the deed when they asked about the house's provenance. I handed it to the sheriff and watched his eyes move left to right like a man learning that a river runs uphill. This says, he started. It says what it says, I answered. Eleanor's line. I can draw you a map if you need. The appraiser cleared his throat. The house is entailed. To the women, I said. Welcome to a history you thought didn't know how to write its name. They left with their list, short, by one beautiful old building. I walked them to the door like a hostess who knows her worth and shut it gently, because gentleness is sometimes the only weapon that doesn't backfire. When the gravel settled, a woman stepped out from behind the lilac bushes and wiped her hands on her apron like she'd been tending my garden longer than I'd had the nerve to water it. Grey hair pinned up in a bun, eyes like clear soup on a cold day, strong and comforting. Auntie Clara, Rosalie said, and the way her voice broke on the first syllable. Well, I nearly fell to my knees, child, Clara answered. And it was a benediction. She walked right up the steps and into the foyer like she'd never left. She set a small parcel on the hall table and kissed my cheek in a way that made me feel 17 and forgiven. Ruthie, she said, because some folks refuse to let go of your girl name, no matter how many winters you survived. You found the box. Your mama always had better aim than most angels. I tried to speak, but my tongue wouldn't unclench. I took her hand and led her to the kitchen, like I was introducing an organ I just found inside my own ribcage. She sat, folded her hands, and looked at me like she'd birthed me herself. I was there, she said gently, answering questions I hadn't asked yet. I caught Rosalie. Your mama held your face so you wouldn't try to split yourself in two, trying to be a daughter and a mother in one night. Your daddy sat on the porch and smoked and did sums in his head to keep from crying. We did the thing we did, 'cause the town would have eaten you alive and grown, taller on the bones. I took the baby for a while, found her a place that looked safe and wasn't. Then another that was safer and wasn't. Then another. I kept my eye. I never stopped. Your mother watched the house because she knew one day it would decide to tell the truth. I reached across the table and took her weathered hands. They felt like bread made right. Why didn't you come sooner? Because you weren't ready, she said simply. And because your husband asked me not to. She slid the parcel toward me. Inside were letters tied with string, edges worn thin as summer cotton. The first was from my mother. The last was from Charles, dated the week before he died. Ruth, he wrote, if you're reading this, then Auntie Clara has decided you won't bite her. Be tender with her. She loved you when you were unlovable. She saved our girl when I was too proud to ask for directions. The lion's mess. Clara knows more than you think. She kept books for the church when the church thought women shouldn't do math. Ask her about Sparrow. She'll tell you about the man who calls himself a deacon and thinks the Lord won't count what he keeps. I felt cold move through me, like a saint changing places with a sinner. Clara, I said, who is Sparrow really? She sighed, the kind of sigh that folds up 100 afternoons of being told to go back to the kitchen. Your great-granddaddy called himself clever. He called Mr. Thomas Lyon, the first one to hang a sign in this town, by the bird he shot most proud. They hunted together and loved each other with the kind of love men give each other when they ain't been taught how to love themselves. Then money got involved, and so did the law, and so did the fear. Sparrow was how your great-granddaddy wrote Lion, when he wanted to tell the truth without having to hear the echo. So it was Lion, Rosalie whispered, and her hand tightened on my arm. It is, and it ain't, Clara said. She looked toward the front of the house, where the lilacs were tapping the glass like old women asking to come in. Names change, but appetites don't. Thomas is dead. His son is dead. But the hunger he taught, it learned new shoes. It goes to church. It sits on boards. It smiles with all its teeth. I stared at the ledger. I stared at the tape. I stared at the ceiling where the plaster cracked in the shape of a river I used to know. So what do we do? You live, Clara said, and then you decide how loud to be. I stood up too fast and felt the room tilt. Rosalie was there, steady as a kitchen chair. I pressed my hand to her hair and felt the violin charm, missing from her bracelet, resting now like a promise in the attic wall. Even our jewelry knew how to aim. We took that afternoon to open every window. It was a small rebellion, the way we let the air move as it pleased. We aired the quilts. We took portraits down and found pencil marks behind them. Dates, measurements, a boy's name scratched into plaster. J. Avery. My knees forgot how to hold me for a second. James, I said, and tasted the whole river. Again, Auntie Clara turned so slow it felt like watching a door creak open in winter. You didn't know he worked here, she said. Not a question. I didn't know anything, I answered. That's the hell of it. I traced the letters with my finger. J. Avery. Small. Determined. Like a boy trying to leave proof he'd been more than a rumor. After you left, Clara said, voice soft. James came back with a hammer and shame. He asked your daddy for a job, 'cause he thought money might build a bridge where apology had failed. Your daddy took him on because he believed in penance. The boy worked these rooms with his hands. Then he got drafted. Then he didn't come back. The house leaned toward us, as if it wanted to be sorry too. My dear, before I lead you into the cellar with me, may I ask you something? If you were me, would you hunt down the ghosts? Or would you let the past rest if it's finally laying down? Tell me, what's the bravest thing you've ever done for the sake of your own peace? That night, a storm rolled up the hill like a drunk with a bouquet. We took candles to the cellar because the fuse box down there is a stubborn old man who needs coaxing. The cellar of Hawthorne House is a museum of things too sturdy to throw away. Crocks that held pickles before my mother forgot how to delight herself. A bicycle with a flat and a bell that still sings. 1,000 jars of screws nobody will ever need until the day right after you toss them. The light found the far wall where the stone meets the earth, and the house remembers she was an idea before she was a home. Water had found a way in and made a dark line, like a smile in the wrong place. Something about that line looked like a door. We moved the crocks, the jars, a chair whose ancestors were probably more famous than mine. There it was, a patch of new mortar on old stone, not new, but younger by a couple of decades. The kind of patch a man throws up when he's got a secret and a trowel. Rosalie fetched the chisel from the tool drawer that holds every size of screw, but the one you need. The mortar flaked away, obedient as pie crust, and a brick loosened with a sigh. Behind it, an iron box, floor level, dry as gossip. We hauled it out, legs braced, ghosts watching, no lock, just a lid that asked to be brave. Inside, a stack of letters tied with a ribbon that used to be blue, a bundle of receipts, and a photograph of James Avery in uniform. Hat crooked, grin sideways, eyes like someone who'd tried on responsibility and found it too big, but wore it anyway. On the back, for E. In case I didn't say enough, I sat right down on the stone and read by candlelight like I was 12 and learning who I was going to be. James's letters were apologies, written by a boy learning how to be a man, without anyone telling him where to put his mouth when he said, I'm sorry. He said he'd waited by the river. He said he'd talked to my daddy. He said he'd hammered door frames and hung windows until his fingers learned to respect glass. He said he'd left for the war, thinking one kind of bravery could pay for the other kind he'd failed at. He said if he didn't come back, he wanted me to know he had loved me with the exact same part of himself that was now being asked for. He signed every letter the same. You're Jay, if you want me. I cried so quietly, the candle flame wobbled, but didn't go out. Rosalie put her head on my shoulder and read with me. And there we were, 3 people who had tried to build a house out of choices and found ourselves in the cellar, forgiven by the dead. The receipts told another story. Lumber, wages. A payment from Thomas Lyons stamped received in full, there, in ink that bled like it had been ashamed while it dried. The words, Hawthorne renovations, paid, debt satisfied, 1946. Sparrow scratched in the corner like a dare. Clara peered over my shoulder. That there, she said, tapping the stamp, is your proof. Thomas's boy kept the debt on his ledgers anyway. Nobody questioned him, 'cause he asked them not to, and they wanted to eat at his house. I stood up slow, my bones rattling, like dice in the bottom of a cup. We take this to Darnell, I said. We take the ledger. We play the tape if we have to. We don't let the hunger keep our names. Rosalie squeezed my hand until my rings printed themselves into my skin. You bet, she said, and I heard my own mother in her voice. The part of me that could always stand back up. We made an appointment and wore our good coats and our bad moods. Mr. Darnell listened with his glasses down on his nose. Like the truth had come to perch there. We laid out the ledger. We laid out the receipts. We played Charles's voice and watched the old man rearrange his respect for my husband's ghost. This is substantial, he said carefully. It's enough, I said, and even if it ain't, it's ours. He cleared his throat. I'll call Lyon and Sons. Don't call, Clara said from her chair, the way saints would talk if they'd been allowed to take the bar. Write and copy the paper, and the Attorney General, and my cousin, who runs the radio hour on Tuesdays, and has never once minded getting loud about men who try to keep their boots clean with other people's necks. We left feeling like we'd pulled one board out of a dam. The water didn't stop. It just learned how to speak. The town did what towns do when women stop apologizing. They kept their eyes down and their ears open and waited to see who looked most like God in the end. Some came by with casseroles, and I made a little shrine to forgiveness out of Tupperware and wrote a thank you note the way you do when kindness shows up disguised as green bean casserole. Some crossed the street and I crossed right back and asked about their mama's cough. 'Cause manners cost nothing and change everything. At night, Hawthorne House stretched and settled and told us more if we let her. You don't break a silence. That's blessed you. You learn its shape and you say grace. One evening toward the end of August, when the cicadas had finally decided what song to sing, someone slipped another red envelope under my door. I found it with bare feet and a sense that I'd stepped on a heartbeat. My Ruth, the letter said in Charles's wandering script. This is the part I was too ashamed to say on the tape. Eleanor, your mother, asked me to give something back that wasn't mine to keep. I didn't. I thought I could hold it until you could. I thought time would make me braver. I was wrong. In the wall behind the library's portrait of the hunt, second panel from the left, you'll find the last thing that's truly yours. Don't be gentle. The wall has had its say. I went to the library and looked up at the painting of men on horses, trying to outrun their better angels. I hated that painting, the way you hate a mirror when you're tired. Rosalie brought the step. Store. I pried at the molding until it popped like a knuckle, and behind the panel was a small wooden box, burned with a single letter. I opened it with a reluctance I'd learned from burying the past. Inside was a ring, not my wedding band, not any ring I'd ever seen. Gold, simple, with a tiny violet enamel set where a diamond should have preened. Inside, engraved, for R, when you choose yourself. I sat on the floor in my good dress and put the ring on the finger of my right hand. It fit like it had been waiting for me to become the woman who could wear it. Mama, Rosalie whispered, I'm saying yes to me. I whispered back, My dear, if this story has been walking you back to a door you closed a long time ago, would you tell me, just with a little heart in the comments, if words are too heavy? And if you're new here, subscribe and sit a spell. I'll keep the porch light on for you. We thought the worst was over. We thought the law would yawn, say, well then, and move on to the next scandal. We thought ghosts were memories, with better timing. We were wrong in small ways, and right in the ones that mattered. 2 weeks after we sent Darnell out into the world, with a suitcase full of righteous paper, a car I didn't recognize rolled slow up our drive. Tires on gravel, like teeth on bone. A man got out wearing a suit that made him look like the kind of man who thinks forgiveness is for the weak. He had cufflinks that caught the sun. He had a smile that could bruise fruit. Behind him, a boy my granddaughter's age, if I'd had one, held a folder and looked at the house like he might fall in love if nobody stopped him. Mrs. Whitaker, the man said, extending a hand like he wanted to shake and steal in one gesture. I'm Robert Lyon. You don't say, I answered, not taking his hand. You're late. He smiled with fewer teeth this time. We received some documents. Compelling, if incomplete. Thought I'd come and see the lady at the center of it all. I ain't a donut, I said, and Rosalie snorted behind. Me. I'm not interested in your center metaphors. He laughed too loud. You're a character, Mrs. Whitaker. Only in other people's stories, I said. In mine, I'm just tired. He flicked a look past me into the foyer. Beautiful house. Shame about the upkeep. These old places eat money. Good thing we feed her love, I said, feeling my jaw go hard. She prefers that, he sighed, like a man forced to stop flirting. Look, we want to resolve this, quietly. We're prepared to forgive the debt your late husband. There is no debt, I said. There is a ledger. There is a receipt. There is a tape. There is also a woman with time, and a daughter who knows how to set a camera up for the internet. You want quiet? I leaned forward. So do I. It's the sound of you walking back down my steps. The boy behind him, 18 maybe, with a tan line where a watch used to be, looked at me, then looked at Rosalie, then looked at the house. He shifted his weight like a confession, trying to find a mouth. Mr. Lyon, he said finally, voice careful. Maybe we should… Evan! Robert snapped without turning. Not now, Evan. The name fell in the room like a coin landing. Heads. Bring your boss inside, I said sweetly. Let me pour you tea, or don't. Either way, the violets need watering and my patience ain't bottomless. Robert stepped inside with the look of a man indulging a quaint custom. He sat on my mother's chair like it might bite. Evan stayed standing, eyes running over the mantel, the portrait, the place where the wall didn't look as smug as it used to. You know, he said softly, almost to himself. My grandmother used to tell me about a house up on a hill where people went when they needed to be told the truth. Said the house told it, not the folks inside. Your grandmother is smarter than you're paid to make her look, I said. Take notes. We didn't show them the cellar box. We didn't let them breathe too close to the ledger. We did. Let them see the deed. And we watched Robert Lyon's face learn how to be a student in a class he thought he was teaching. This is surprising, he said, which is what men say when they mean damning. You can say binding, I offered. It won't burn your tongue. He stood, looked like a man who'd just chewed a clove, and put on his hat. You've made your point, he said. We'll be in touch. Do that, I said. But not after 10 at night. That's when my house tells stories. And you wouldn't like them. Evan lingered. Ma'am, he said, eyes wide open. If that tape ever needed a place to duplicate. My uncle runs a studio. He's not like he's not He believes women. Rosalie smiled at him, with a kindness that could save a boy. Thank you, she said. We'll holler if we need noise. They left, and the light shifted in the foyer like approval. That evening, I took my right-hand ring off and turned it in my fingers till the violet caught the last of the day. I thought about James and the way his letters had apologized to me in the shape of a house. I thought about Charles and the way his voice had trusted me from beyond the solve. I thought about my mother and Auntie Clara and how women keep saving the world and then making supper when the lamp was low and the house had that feel it gets when the past is practicing its lines. I went to the library and stood under the portrait of the hunt. I pressed my ear to the wall because that's what fools do in fairy tales. And sometimes it works. The plaster was cool. The wood behind it was warmer than it ought to have been. And, Lord have mercy, something like a breath, then the sound of paper shifting. Rosalie, I called, and my voice didn't tremble so much as dance. Bring the chisel. I think the wall wants to tell on itself. We pried where the molding met the panel. And that old house gave, not with a creak of protest, but with the relief of a secret too long kept. The panel swung, and behind it, tucked into a recessed shelf, was an old brass speaking tube, the kind folks used before they invented hollering up the stairs. The tube ran into the wall, down into the bones of the house, and inside the little mouthpiece, wrapped in oilcloth, was a reel smaller than the one we'd played, labeled in tiny hand, hardly there, for when you love me again. I sat right there on the floor and laughed, because crying had stepped out for some air, and we needed a change. We threaded the second tape into the machine and held our breaths, like the door between now and then was about to open. My girls, Charles said, voice clearer this time, younger, like he'd recorded it before the cough learned his name. If you found this, it means the house thinks you're ready to hear the whole song. The lion's men will come. Let them. They're loud because they think noise is the same thing as power. It ain't. Power is knowing where the beams are. Power is knowing who your mother was. Power is knowing a woman can carry a secret and then set it down when it gets too heavy. If you want a map, you already have it. If you want absolution, ask Ruth. She owns more of it than she knows what to do with. If you want to hear me say the thing I kept trying to say and kept missing, here it is. I'm sorry for loving you with training wheels. I'm sorry for wanting you to be easier than you were. I'm sorry for not telling you sooner that I knew about the baby and that I was proud of the woman who survived what that took from her. Rosalie, if you're listening, you take care of my girl. She may look like oak, but she's willow under a full moon. Bendon's how we've lasted. Now, go open the blue envelope. Do it in the morning with the window open. It'll make sense. Then, we let the machine hum itself to sleep, and we sat in the quiet, 2 women and a house, and a voice almost asleep in the air. We waited till morning the way children wait for Christmas, when they already know their mother bought the doll they begged for. Dawn came like an old friend who knows you've been bragging about her. We opened the window. The blue of the sky climbed right into the kitchen. I took the blue ribboned envelope from the 3rd stairs hollow and untied it like it had a pulse. Inside were 3 things. A cashier's check with more zeros than my life had ever had room for, a key labelled Orchard West, and a note in the small, precise hand of my mother, Ruthie. Sometimes the only way out is through your own front door. Go to the west side of the orchard, to the quince tree with the stubborn fruit. Dig where the roots look like knuckles. Bring gloves, bring courage. Bring the part of yourself that still believes a house can bless a person. We dress like gardeners, and soldiers both. The west orchard is where the light always looks a little like it's been forgiven. The quince tree stood there all lopsided and proud. fruit like small fists on tired branches. We dug. The earth gave up rocks and old bones, and a marble I remembered losing at 9. We dug until the shovel sang a different song, metal on metal. We cleared dirt, brushed roots, tender as veins, and there it was. Another box, this one copper, this one locked. The key fit like it had been waiting to be useful. Inside, a stack of land transfer deeds, older than my sense of being wrong, all signed by women with my mother's jaw and my grandmother's eyes, a chain of ownership that looped around men and never once got tangled in their pockets. And at the bottom, a letter addressed to me in my great-grandmother's hand. Ruth, I don't know you, but I love you. If this reached you, it means we did something right and something wrong. The right was saving your name. The wrong was making you carry it alone so long. This house will keep telling you what to do if you keep asking it with your hands. When the wolves come, invite them to tea and read to them from the book of women who wanted more. When the men who think they own you show up with numbers, show them your violets. When the law tries to remember who made it, remind it you've been here longer. And when you think you've run out of love, open the pantry and take down the jar labeled tomorrow. There is always another spoonful. I pressed the letter to my heart and laughed until crying remembered me. That evening, just as the sun licked the edge of the hill and decided to take a nap, I stood on the porch and held Rosalie's hand and watched a fox dart along the stone wall. We had more to do. We had men to write to, and women to bring into the room, and receipts to copy, and a tape to duplicate twice, and bury in different attics. We had a house to keep teaching us, and violets to deadhead, and a sheriff to bring a pie to because he'd stood in my foyer like a man relearning his manners. We also had a knock. I opened the door to a boy with a hat in his hands and a fear in his eyes. I recognized like a photograph of my own mistakes. Evan Lyon stood there with his shoulders hunched like he'd been practicing apology and didn't know which muscle it lived in. "Ma'am," he said, "my grandmother wanted to see you. She's in the car. She hasn't left the house in a year, but she's here." He swallowed. "She says she used to bring violets to your mother. My dear, if you're still with me, bless you. Are you ready to meet the lion nobody warned us about? If this has been stirring your own house of memories, tell me where you're listening from, honey. It helps me to picture your kitchen light. If you stayed with me till the end, my dear, thank you. Tell me the time and country you're watching from in the comments. It warms my old heart knowing where my stories travel." She was small enough to be a secret and strong enough to be a story. Evan helped her out of the car, like you'd help. The moon down from a branch. She wore a grey dress, buttoned all the way to her throat, that had swallowed more words than most men ever speak. Her hair was the colour of old wildflowers, pressed in a Bible. She held a handkerchief she didn't use. "Mrs. Lyon," I said, and even my bones stood up to meet her. "Mabel," she corrected softly. "Don't give my husband the dignity of living in my name when he's been dead 10 years and wrong longer." She smiled, quick and shy, then turned to Rosalie. "Child, Auntie," Rosalie said, without meaning to, and even the wind was quiet for a beat. We brought her inside. She didn't look around like a lady admiring a hall. She looked like somebody greeting a room she'd waited for at a station too long. She set a small velvet pouch on the foyer table and rested her palm on the wood, the way old friends touch foreheads. "I used to bring violets to your mother," she said to me. "Eleanor, we were girls together once. Then we were wives together. Then we were women who learned about the cost of men's ideas." She shook her head a little. "I should have done more. I should have been louder, but I brought flowers. I thought beauty could barter for justice. Lord help me, I was wrong." "It kept her company," I whispered. "It kept me brave," she said. but I came today to stop being polite." She opened the velvet pouch and spilled out a ring of keys and one small brass stamp. The kind you use to press wax when you're sealing a letter. The face of the stamp was worn, but I knew that crest better than I knew my own fear. A hawthorn sprig and a violet twined together. Eleanor's mark. I kept it, Mabel said. Thomas, his daddy, used it to seal agreements with the women of this town when the men wanted to pretend the meetings never happened. When Walter, my husband, decided to carry the debt forward like it was a family heirloom, I took the stamp. I took copies of the receipts. I took the ledger page where he scrolled, "Paid in full," and then wrote it again lighter, like maybe the ink wouldn't count if it didn't shout. She looked up at me, eyes clear as cold water. I brought them. I'm old enough not to be scared anymore. Rosalie reached for her hand. "We're glad you waited until now, Mabel," she said. "There's room in this kitchen for the truth today. That girl of mine has a way of setting a table with nothing but her voice." We sat where grief never surprised the sugar bowl. Mabel pulled out an envelope with edges like lace, fragile where it had been opened and closed too many times to count. She placed it in my hands like a christening. "Your mother," she said. "I promised to give it to you when you were ready. I mistook my fear for your unreadiness." Her mouth trembled, then steadied. "I'm sorry, Ruthie." I pressed the flap back and breathed in the faint ghost of lavender and wood smoke. The paper crinkled like autumn leaves when I unfolded it. My mother's hand ran across the page in loops that still knew how to sing. "Ruthie, if this finds you, it means you let the house love you again. It means you've stopped punishing yourself for surviving. The day you put your baby in my arms, I held your face and told you a truth I don't think you heard over the thunder. You are not a sin. You are mine. You are more than anything you've ever done in fear. This house belonged to the women before you. It will belong to the women after, if you let it. Teach your daughter to listen to the beams. Teach her that guilt can be heavy and still not be holy. And if the lion's men come calling with old debts wearing new shoes, remind them that violets return every spring without asking for permission. I loved you then. I love you now. I am learning to forgive myself too." "Mama," the room blurred and then cleared like a church window after a storm. I pressed my lips to the paper right where her name ended, like maybe the ink still held her mouth. "I forgive you," I whispered to a woman who'd been dead long enough to stop needing it and alive long enough inside me to hear it anyway. Mabel took a breath like a pledge. "Ruth," she said, "you don't owe me a thing, but if you have a corner of forgiveness you can spare, I'd be grateful." I looked away when I should have looked up. I let my husband call theft by a nicer name. When I found the truth, I hid it like a girl hides candy. I told myself I was biding my time. Time ain't a bank, it's a house, and I stayed outside. I reached across and took both her hands in mine. They were warm as bread. "Mabel," I said, "I'm tired of collecting debts I never wanted. Today I'm giving change. Yes, I forgive you." She cried the way old women cry when their tears knew all the steps before their knees did. Evan stood in the doorway and looked like a boy trying to balance every father he'd been given and every man he might become. "Grandmama," he said softly. She patted the chair beside her. "Come here and watch me do it right," she told him. We called Sheriff Hardy. We called Mr. Darnell. Mabel called her lawyer, a woman whose voice sounded like somebody's favorite aunt and whose shoes, I imagine, knew their way around a courtroom in the dark. We called no one from Lion and Sons. By late afternoon, the house had grown an audience. Auntie Clara took the head of the table like a general with flour on her hands. Sheriff Hardy had that look men get when they know the tide has turned and they need to move their boots or get wet. Mr. Darnell laid out the ledger, the receipts, the deed, Charles's letter, all careful as communion. Mabel laid down her copies, one after another, pages that smelled like attics and hard hope, and then Mabel pulled out one more thing and set it down with the kind of gentleness you reserve for babies and confessions. A sworn statement, notarized, dated, signed by Walter Lyon 25 years ago. I, Walter Alton Lyon, do acknowledge that the debt owed to the Hawthorne estate, Eleanor Lyon, was paid in full in 1946, that I knowingly allowed my son to carry it forward as leverage, that I kept copies of receipts and the paid in full stamp locked in my desk, with the intent to release them when my son learned humility. He did not. I did not. I leave these in the care of my wife, Mabel, with the request she put right what I did not. The room went quiet, like it was listening to a man try to be decent too late. Mabel's chin didn't shake. Sheriff Hardy looked at me, and then at the paper, and then at Rosalie, with a kind of care you don't often see from a badge. Well, he said, that dog won't hunt anymore. That dog never should have been allowed in the yard, Auntie Clara muttered. We made copies until the yard machine got hot and offended. We sent them where paper goes to be seen. The Attorney General, the Bar Association, the paper, the radio, the bank, the church. Darnell wrote a letter that could have doubled as a sermon. Mabel called her granddaughter, the one who ran a community legal clinic in the next county, and said, "Baby, fetch your loudest friends." It took 3 days for Robert Lyon to show up with a smile and a spine made of borrowed swagger. We met him on the front steps, like a pair of weather vanes that had decided which way to point. "Mrs. Whitaker," he began, tilting his head like, "Pity had a price." "Mister," I answered, giving him back his name without the courtesy of the rest. "You're late to your own reckoning." He saw Mabel then. He faltered. "Mother," he said, and it sounded like a child who'd practiced the word to get out of trouble. She stood between us, that little woman made of violets and resolve. "Robert," she said, calm as rain, "I loved you enough to let you be wrong in a room where it only hurt me. I'm done loving you that way. You will send a letter to this house and this town, acknowledging the debt was paid and the harassment was wrong. You will step back from that firm and let Evan choose a different name to live under if he wants. You will make a donation to the Eleanor Trust." She nodded at me, and I nodded back, because names matter when you're building something. That helps girls get the kind of help Ruth didn't, without asking them for anything but their name. He opened his mouth and closed it and opened it again. "You can't." "I can," she said, lifting her chin. "Because you forgot what kind of woman raised you, and what kind of house raised this town." He burned a minute and then went out like a match in the rain. "You'll hear from my attorneys," he said. "We already did." Mr. Darnell chimed in from the doorway, savoring each syllable like a hard candy. "They're resigning representation as of this morning." Robert's face folded into itself, a little, like pride learning about air. He left without slamming the door, because even he knew better than to wake a house that could write letters. Evan stayed. He stood on my porch and looked out over the orchard where the quince tree threw shadows like musical notes. "I don't want any of it," he said, quiet. "The money, the name, the way they do things." He swallowed, still watching the light move. Do you ever take on help?" I laughed, sweet and surprised. "Son, this house eats work. For breakfast. You handy?" He smiled, and it was like seeing a window open in a boy's face. I could be. A week later, he was fixing the loose hinge on the pantry door and asking Auntie Clara for her biscuit recipe, like a man who had come to the right church. The letters went public. The paper ran a headline that made folks spill their coffee. The radio played Charles's voice, between hymns and weather. The Attorney General sent a letter that said the words we had wanted to hear, before we learned to speak them ourselves. Case closed, claims withdrawn, apology issued, Lion and Sons rebranded to Lion, then to something toothless and short-lived. Robert went quiet in a town where quiet means nobody's saving you a seat. Mabel's statement got framed in the courthouse between a map of the county and a portrait of a judge who still thinks sweaters are a personality. We set up the Eleanor Trust with what Charles left and what Mabel insisted the Lions add. Rosalie took the lead because the girl knows how to lift something heavy and set it down gentle. The first check we wrote paid for a young mama's counselling without making her explain herself. The second put a roof back on a woman's house after her man ran off with her savings, and the church called it a test. The third bought a piano for the school because I'd be damned if the next Ruth grew up without a set of keys to set on, her hands upon. We opened Hawthorne House on the last Thursday of every month for storytelling suppers. Bring your own truth, the little card said, and a dish if you can. The first night, a woman who'd never raised her voice read a poem that made the wallpaper bloom. The second, Sheriff Hardy cried into his cobbler, and then laughed, and then cried again. The third, a girl with nails painted violet stood up and said, "My name is mine," and the house hummed yes. Not all endings are banners. Some are chairs pulled close, and ankles tucked under quilts. But there was one more thing the house had been holding for me, and it gave it back the day the first snow fell like forgiveness. Rosalie was dusting the banister with the kind of reverence that makes dust want to behave itself. She stopped at the landing and pressed her finger into the carved rosette at the post's heart. "Mama," she called, voice full of something that promised a story. "Come see, there, tucked into a tiny pocket of wood, folded into a shape so small. I almost missed it if I hadn't learned to be a student of details. Was a square of paper. It was brittle and brave, and smelled like cedar and long summers. I teased it out with the edge of my nail and opened it slow. Not a letter, not a receipt, a piece of sheet music, hand-drawn. Notes sketching a melody I knew before I knew letters. At the bottom, a signature, J. Avery. I sat on the stair with my knees apart like a girl and let the music run up my arms and into my throat. Rosalie fetched the page protector like a doctor, tender as a lullaby. We put the paper on the piano, and she played it exactly the way my mother had hummed it by the sink, and the way I had hummed it by the river, and the way the house had been, trying to hum it through the floorboards since we walked in. James had left me a song in the wood. He had found a way to say, "I'm sorry, and I love you, and I want you to have something beautiful," without knocking on my door and breaking me open. I cried that day, and then I didn't cry for 2 months. Grief gets full and needs to lay down. So does joy. We buried Auntie Clara under the old oak in spring and put a violin charm on her stone, because she had taught so many of us how to play ourselves without apology. Mabel lived long enough to attend 2 of our suppers and to give Evan a signet, ring he didn't want, but put in a drawer for a day when maybe a name would need forgiving again. She asked me once, on the porch with the light doing that ribbon thing it does in May, "Do you think we did enough?" I told her the only truth that is ever held. We did what we could with what we had. And then we set the table for people who could do a little more. Rosalie got married under the quince tree in late June. Not to a man who needed saving, or to a lie dressed as hope. To a woman who brought her a bouquet of violets and tied the knot with a laugh that sounded like a door unlocking. The town blinked and tried to remember who taught it to be kind. We served pie and chicken and one of those salads old ladies make with green jello an inexplicable fruit. The house held it all, patient and pleased. Sometimes I dream of my mother. She's sitting at my kitchen table, sipping coffee with her eyes closed, like she's listening to the way steam talks. She says, "Ruthie, you did the brave thing." I wake up, and the house has that smell it gets when someone approves of it. Rosalie says, "Mornin', Mama," and the day begins like a hymn that knows all the words, even when your throat doesn't. People still stop me in town. They say, "Is it true, Mrs. Whitaker? Did your husband leave everything to the maid?" And I say, "He left everything to my daughter, Honey." Sometimes it takes the wrong word to write the right ending. If my telling has put a hand on your back and pushed you through your own hard doorway, would you let me know? My dear, before I put the kettle back and blow out this lamp, if this story has touched your heart even a little, do subscribe and stay close. And tell me, have you ever decided to let go of a debt, emotional or otherwise, even though you were owed? I'd love to hear how that felt in your bones. I still step on the third stair, wrong on purpose some days, just to hear it sing. The house likes to be reminded that secrets can make music when they're ready. I wear the violet ring on my right hand and my wedding band on my left, and when I fold my hands in my lap, they look like a woman who finally chose herself and then kept choosing the people she loved, one morning at a time. Thank you for sitting with me. Thank you for letting my house tell you her stories. The violets will be blooming soon. If you come by, I'll send you home with a jar of tomorrow from the pantry and a song stuck in your head you won't mind humming while you wash your dishes. If you stayed with me till the end, my dear, thank you. Tell me the time and country you're watching from in the comments. It warms my old heart knowing where my stories travel.